Welcome to the Joanne Averson podcast. And this week, it just happens to be Mother's Day. And I had the great privilege and joy of having breakfast with my mother and my sister this morning. And it made me think of how amazing my mother was the way through all our family time together. She held us all together. And there were ups and downs in our lives and a lot of mental illness around my dad when we were younger. And somehow my mother's devotion, her loving, her dedication, her optimism, her curiosity, and her insistence about magicalness somehow ruled the family ethos. And through that, she held our whole family together, and through thick and thin, we stayed together as a team. And the four of us have always been absolutely dedicated to each other. And each one of us have had our moments in life where it's been serious illness and difficulties and major joys and delights. And we're all still here to tell the story, except Dad, who, as many of you who know me know, passed away in 2019, very quickly, painlessly, and nobly. And he was a wonderful man, my father. And having been really quite ill in his 40s, my mother held everything together and he steadied out and wasn't ill. For 40 years, we just had the most amazing family. And my son was born into that. And a reason I'm sharing it is because I wanted to share with you something about fascia and the in-between and the importance of recognizing its role as the in-between. But I want to create a sort of possibility of expanding our minds to including not just the physical, not just our imaginations, not just our emotions or our thoughts, not even our subconscious, but all of that, and the soul or the spirit that animates us. And how or why is the fascia so important in that knowing? And what's it got to do with my dad? Well, I'm going to start off by sharing with you a little bit of the dedication to him in the second edition of my book, Yoga, Fascia, Anatomy and Movement. And well, just join me for the ride and enjoy. And I hope you'll get some little light bulb moments out of this. And by the way, just to tell you, when we were children, my mother used to take us out and we weren't allowed to go near puddles unless we had our puddle boots on. And if we did, we could stamp as much as we wanted. And we used to have upside down days where we had dinner for breakfast and breakfast for dinner and picnics on the landing. And she literally made our childhoods magical. And I remember once I was in a kind of self-development training, it's about 40 years ago, and we were creating ourselves as a possibility for the future. And my creation was magicalness in everyday life. And it comes from my mother. And she does manage to make things magical. And so creating myofascial magic in action with Paul Thornley has been something of an exciting possibility, but it's also rooted in a very deep passion for something that I think is available to all of us. You'll see what I mean by the time we get to the end of this, I hope. So this is the dedication. My father's name was William, and I used to call him Daddy Billy William. So, to Daddy Billy William, your last words to me on this side of the veil carried me through this second edition. Thank you for teaching me so very fundamentally to love learning and to learn lovingly and with laughter every day. You could not bear segregation of any sort, and to that end, my guiding light has been a dedication to wholeness of body, mind, and being, which in living, breathing life on earth are not segregated either. They only appear so in our inherited anatomy books. The mystical principle that the one and the all is the same is emerging in these 2020s, and with it, the new ways of understanding our living bodies. I dedicate this effort to explaining that, scientifically and in practice with love, light, and the sound of laughter. And I love you for teaching me at the age of 6 this poem. Scintillate, scintillate, global vivific, fain would I fathom thy nature specific, loftily poised in the ether capacious, strongly resembling a gem carbonaceous. Think about it for a minute. And I wrote in the dedication, thank you for reminding me it's the nursery rhyme. It just depends how you say it, right, Pop? And the nursery rhyme is, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. I dedicate this second edition to you and your grandson, who is my little star. You both share a wicked sense of humour and a nobility of mind to stand for truth and grace, and it is my privilege to be daughter and mother, the sandwich generation between two noblemen. I love you for all eternity. There's a little bit more to that dedication, but what I wanted to say today was how beautifully woven everything is together, and how everything relates to everything else, and how the one and the all really are the same. Or shall we say same, but different. And why I think it's so important for anybody learning to understand about fascia, but even more so for people that are actually teaching movement or doing manual therapy or seeking to integrate powerful outcomes of pain relief and improved performance for their clients and for each other and for themselves. And why is this all so important? Well, I often see on social media all kinds of claims of expertise about fascia and articles written, and I really, I'm fascinated about how people select these things and turn them into sort of bumper stickers and brilliant posts. I'm not criticizing them, but sometimes they can be a bit distorted if we don't understand that the whole thing about understanding fascia is that it's a paradigm shift. And that means we can't use the old language and the old way of seeing the body and just sort of reorganize it into a new way of describing it. We actually have to see it differently. Now, a lot of you know that I study spiritual science. I have a doctorate in that. And what brought me to that was my study of fascia, funnily enough, and realizing through my practice and through my spiritual work as a minister that the idea that this physical structure is somehow distinct from, it can be distinguished from, but not separate from anything else in the human body is a kind of an erroneous notion. And some of you are going to be so familiar with what I'm saying, but I hope it might give you new ways of explaining it yourselves. Because I remember, and I'm reading little bits from my book as I go, I remember when fascia was first talked about. So I first met Tom Myers in 1998, and he was the first person to really describe fascia to me. And I then went and worked with him for many years and understood anatomy trains and really learned how to work with it as a map of the body to guide a manual practice, but also as a way of seeing bodies to assist them in moving. We're going back now to the turn of this millennium. And so I've seen a lot of iterations of descriptions of the fascia. And it's sometimes called the fasciae as if they're plural. But one of the ideas I offer you is the one that it's one piece in each body. And it has all kinds of varieties of thickness and texture and qualities. And it doesn't all do the same thing. So, for example, the fascia of the eardrum, the fascia of a mitral valve in the heart, the fascia of the colon or the fascia of an artery, or the fascia of a muscle, myofascia, or what can only really be crystallized fascia of bone, or the very fine fascia of the periosteum that doesn't just cover the bone like a sort of sock. It's actually embedded with these tiny fibers into the bone, so it's in communication with the bone and it's forming. And the fascia that's immediately under the skin, and to many highly qualified researchers, the fascia of the skin, they are all expressions of one unifying fabric. And this takes us to the ancient spiritual belief, as I mentioned in the dedication, that the one and the all are the same. And I'm going to read you a few bits just out of the beginning of the book to give you a sense of this powerful in-betweenness. And it's hard to find the language all the time because it's taking us out of our comfort zone of purely scientific language. It's not sufficient to explain our experience as beings of our fascial matrix. So let me see if I can get us somewhere. I quote, "The importance of fascia has become clearer and more differentiated only comparatively recently. Fascia is the name given to a specific and variable kind of connective tissue that is the subject of a rapidly increasing amount of research with regard to its range, capabilities, and characteristics. From 200 papers per year in the 1970s and 80s to almost 1,000 in 2010 on the subject, the following article in 2019 indicates the exponential rise in research and interest." And I quote, "While anatomy textbooks are slim on fascia, a search on the internet using the term fascia on PubMed alone resulted in excess of 20,000 articles. Anatomical texts provide detailed images and descriptions of muscles, nerves, lymphatics, organs, and blood vessels, while the very tissue connecting, supporting, nurturing, wrapping, and investing them is most often not included. Recent research indicates the role of fascia in the pathogenesis of a variety of conditions, including lumbago, inguinal hernia, and the regulation of posture, muscular biomechanics, peripheral motor coordination, and proprioception." So that was written by John Sharkey. And I share that with you because I want you to understand that this is not me making this up. This is research that people have done, talked about, discussed, and sought to explain. And one of the most difficult things that's explained anywhere is what is fascia? It's a really contentious question. And you may have gathered a lot of detail about it from our Christmas gift podcast, where John Sharkey and Mark Flanagan wrote their paper about the considerations of that definition, because obviously in science, you can't just make up names and you can't just make up definitions. So I really encourage you to listen to that if you haven't. And I'll go on to read you a little piece, and then we'll talk about these different qualities of fascia in different levels of our being. "The fascia is what we might call the stuff in between all of the parts that in traditional dissection has mostly been removed. It is scraped away in order to properly present the more important items, considered, for example, to be the muscles, the joints, the bones, the vessels, and materials of the musculoskeletal system. A similar focus in studying visceral anatomy includes removing fascia to study the more important organs that it wraps. What is perhaps ignored is that everything in the human body is made of fascia, and we will see in the following chapters how that has hidden for so long in the obvious. What is so vitally important and growing in recognition about this exceptional fabric of the human body?" One of the things about the fascia that's kind of difficult to pin down is the fact that it's clearly so much more than simply a structural material that we can see or that we can touch or that we can analyze. Like beingness, like life itself, fascia is in the living body in constant motion. And even those parts that we're moving are also stabilized, managed, and integrated by the parts that we're not moving. So that which we are holding in stillness, as well as that which we are moving, is of just the utmost significance to how this organ of organization organizes us and is organized by us. And that's really hard to analyze. And it reminds me of the ancient Hindu proverb that the three great mysteries of life are air to a bird, water to a fish, and being to a human. And fascia is such an integral part of our beingness that it really is very difficult to reduce to a fabric. Now, one of the key reasons for this is that the fascia is now considered to be the largest sensory organ of the body. And you may have heard that it's part of our proprioception, and you hear different stories about the distinction between interoception and exteroception, i.e. the sense of what's out there from inside and the sense of what's inside from out there and their relationship. But all of that discussion resides in the intellectual realm, i.e. the realm of analysis and deduction. And it's difficult to reduce the fascia to any specific area. Now, let's consider it here. David Butler wrote in 1991 in his book called Mobilization of the Nervous System by Churchill Livingston. He wrote of the nervous system, arguably, there is no other structure in the body with such connectedness. Stresses imposed upon the peripheral nervous system during movement are transmitted to the central nervous system, and conversely, tension can be conveyed from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. If the nervous system were to be considered as an organ, rather than the multi-segmental structure it's commonly thought to be, it would lead to a far better understanding of the system and of the pathomechanical and pathophysiological consequences of altering its mechanics. One of the greatest implications of organ thinking is that if there is some change in part of the system, then it will have repercussions for the whole system. The continuous tissue tract makes this inevitable. Now, this is a very brilliant author, very brilliant man, David Butler, writing about the nervous system and asking for it to be considered as a body-wide organ. And the nervous system is made up of a tissue that is fascia, basically. But we're not just talking about the fabric of the nerves. It's not just that there's nerves running through the fascia and those nerves give the feelings. That would not be accurate. That would be an inadequate explanation of fascia, considering it like the wiring in a house, for example, with the insulated cables and the actual current only goes through those cables. That would not be accurate. When it is said that the fascial system is sensory, we're talking about something called haptic perception, and it's much more subtle than what has been attributed to the nervous system. And this is where how we language this tissue is having to change. Partly, the metaphor that you hear David Butler using of mechanics has become out of date. It's become obsolete, because even if we can deduce or use the phrase mechanical to explain motion, we're not mechanical. We're living beings, and we feel energy in motion, emotion, in all different ways. And it's as much in between the things that are doing the things that we're doing as it is in the integration of how they work all the other things. So you can hear in this quote that anything that changes in one part of the system changes in another. And actually, David Butler refers to tension and compression here, which is something we describe in fasciategrity, which I will talk about in another podcast. But for the moment, I invite you to think, how do we describe, and let's go into the mystery of this, how do we describe something that feels itself? And what do I mean by that? Well, when we self-organize as embryos, which we do, nobody goes in and has a limb bolt-on procedure or inserts your senses or your eyes, your ears or anything like that, or switches them on when you're born. We self-organize from conception as what Jaap van der Waal calls a unicellular being to the multicellular being that we become. It's almost like magic, isn't it? I mean, it's miraculous. It's definitely magical. But we become this complex, exquisitely patterned creature that feels its way into form. Now, the idea that our emotions are separate from our thoughts, are separate from our body, are separate from what we take on as children and act under the spells of, or the things that upset us that get stuck in our minds as ideas that we mustn't do that again, that we try to learn from, to the sense of our spirit and our soul, the anima animus that animates our form. When are they separate? When do you go to a movement class and leave your heart with your kids that you took to school and your head at your desk and bring your body to the mat as if your body can do the movement class without the rest of you? It doesn't happen. Everything's here. And when something happens to us, if we don't feel the feeling, or we don't listen to the messages, or we don't give ourselves some time to have the experience in time, where else is it going to go? And this is a question that intrigues and fascinates me because so many people talk about having an embodied practice. And I really wonder what they mean, because you can't have anything else. You can't move anybody else's body. I mean, yes, of course you can. You can pick up a child and move its body around. But the anima animus moves that body the way it can at the stage it's at, in the state that it's in. We are essentially self-motivated beings. We can help each other because the one and the all is the same. We can influence each other. We can encourage each other. We can discourage each other. But when you work as a movement or manual therapist, the minute you touch someone else, you become one being with more limbs. And when we realize that and we start to integrate that, we start to appreciate how this subtle fabric might be much more than we first thought. And we do have to be super careful not to go too airy-fairy. But the truth is, a great deal of what goes on for us is invisible. It's metaphysical. And what happens in between things is what kind of holds everything together. And I've had the great privilege of being with Neil Thies and talking with him about his research and his history and spending time with him musing over life and how the world works, and being completely fascinated by his work of the interstitium and how the in-between joins things together. But we're not just talking about the in-between of the physical body. And I'm doing a couple of interviews this season with Neil, so you'll have a chance to listen to those. And I'll leave him to speak his own genius. But I invite you to think about the in-between. What do you do in between? I teach yoga, and one of my favorite things is asking people to let go a little bit of the emphasis on completing a posture and finding the pose, and really be curious about how they get there, the in-between. How do we move in between? And my fascination is, how can we train ourselves gently and kindly and lovingly and wisely when we're not doing exercise, when we're not in the gym, when we're not on the mat or on the reformer or at the class? Because this funny phenomena happened, I realised, over many years of practice, when I ask people, what's your main movement? What do you do for movement every day? The answer is almost invariably, I go to the gym so many times a week, or I do so many classes, or I swim this number of lengths. And what gets lost sometimes is the in-between. And your fascia is literally serving you 24/7. And it's feeling you feeling. Even when you're asleep, it kind of knows what's going on. It's got this awareness. And there's something about inner awareness that if we grow it consciously, we can become, I think, calmer. Because it expands something that somehow helps us evolve an inner world to counterbalance the noise and the bustle and the sheer onslaught of information from the outer world. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying it gives us an opportunity to be with the pause in between the notes. And I remember in The Karate Kid, particularly in the second version of the film, when he talks about playing the pauses. And you realize when you're listening to a piece of music that if the pauses aren't right, you can't really hear the music or enjoy it nearly as much. And so I offer you this idea. As human beings, we obviously have a physical body, and we know that the fascia animates and holds together and structuralizes and integrates and senses the in-between of all the structures that it forms and organizes. And then imagine the possibility that we have what we could call an astral body, a body of our imagination. And it's not the same as the physical body. It's, while we're in the physical body, we can imagine things. We can create possibilities in our minds. We can become curious about things. We can ask questions and imagine that maybe we haven't got the answer or that there is an answer worth pursuing. So we need that to sort of feed our intellect to asking even more intelligent questions that make a bigger difference. And beyond that, we have an emotional realm, an emotional body that feels energy in motion and feels things. And some of us feel and express feelings more easily than others. But we all have feelings that we don't like to express and feelings that we do like to express. And feelings that we wish we hadn't expressed, and feelings that we wish we could feel. What if we could find this kind of neutral presence with those and recognize that we have a mental body that thinks and has thoughts, and beyond that, perhaps an unconscious and subconscious awareness? And all of that is there for us to be in touch with. But what animates all of that, what holds all of that, what magicalizes all of that is the spirit, the soul of us. And what if that only knows joy? What if the soul only knows joy because it's in a positive realm and all the others, like imagine a battery with a negative and a positive realm, all the others are in the negative realm. And that's what we deal with every day. But can we bring, like my mother gave me the gift of, can we bring that magic of the soul in and through everything else? Can you imagine? And imagine that the interface of that is the fascial matrix, because it's the tissue that's everywhere. And what if it's just more subtle beyond our skin? And some people say they can see auras and they can see energy fields. And I've never been able to see an aura as such, I don't think. But I certainly can sense whether somebody's coming in with the lights on, with their eyes lit up or their face lit up, or if they're coming in with a sort of cloud over their head. Just, that thing when you just kind of know, that knowing that they call gnosis, 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 that awareness. Is that the magic of our inner awareness? And is that in some way facilitated by our fascia? Physically, emotionally, mentally, etherically, and solically? And is it possible when all of those things are lined up and we're doing what we love, or we're in a conversation with somebody that we love that loves us back, and there's this kind of mutual light between two people? And given that fascia conducts light in the human body, it actually does. There's gold standard peer-reviewed research on it. And given that it conducts sound, are we beings of light and sound? And when we're resonating with another being's awareness at the same frequency, the same honouring, the same excitement, the same humour? Is it possible that that lights up our tissue? And all of us, from the inside out, is uplifted, not just because it's physical, but because the fascia is the in-between of the soul and the body and everything, every kind of sheath of the body, physical, astral, emotional, mental, etheric, that it's all working together. And we don't have to know one from the other necessarily to just experience that joy. Do you think that's possible? I guess we choose how we tell our stories, and we choose to some extent what spells we're under. And I think we've all been under a spell of biomechanics. Sorry, guys that studied biomechanics for years, but I just think it's the wrong metaphor. And it's not helpful because we're not machines and we don't function mechanically. And we naturally include the most diverse, different, creative, magical ways of being. And I've never understood why any one way of being should be considered better or worse or judged right or wrong, given the sort of basic honouring of life and kindness, because we are, after all, kindred spirits. I remember as a child when my father was ill, and I tried to say to people, I know you don't understand. And if my dad had a broken leg and it was in plaster or a bandage on his head, you'd be able to understand how he is, or you wouldn't expect him to be able to do what you might otherwise expect him to be able to do. And back in the day, we're in the 60s, 70s, it wasn't okay. And it never changed how much I loved my dad, and still do. And it never changed how much he loved me and my sister and my mum and my son and his sons-in-law and the people that he worked with. And his last words to me, I was on the phone to him from LA, and I called him up for the last time. And I said, Daddy, I love you. I love who you are. And I love who I am because of you. I love you. And I heard him take a big breath in. And he gathered up all his strength. And I thought he was going to say, I love you too. And he didn't. It was as if he knew that I knew that. And he wanted to say something much bigger. He wanted to say something that would take me through the rest of my life. And he said, well done. And I was shocked and stunned, and I held those words. And I realised that our lives don't need to be about achieving amazing things and achieving great feats, and every day can feel like climbing a mountain sometimes, you know? But if we can just say, well done. And through my studies of fascia over decades now, and embryology, when I consider how each one of us self-organised from a unicellular being to the multicellular being that each one of us is, I say to you, well done. How many things can you look back on today, just today, or even in the last hour, that you did well? Did you listen well? Did you laugh well? Did you eat well? Did you stand well? Did you go into a shop and buy something and speak well to the person that served you? Or did you serve someone well? I carry that with me in my heart. Because in our own way, every single one of us is a star. And every single one of us has stardust in our veins. And that's not hairy-fairy either. It's literal. That's how iron in our veins is there because of falling, dying stars. Are we already doing well? And if we all knew that, our fascia matrix was coursing the blood through our veins well, would we automatically have more self-esteem and more joy? So I finish with a poem. Scintillate, scintillate, global vivific. Fain would I fathom thy nature specific, loftily poised in the ether capacious, strongly resembling a gem carbonaceous. And in other words, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Happy Mother's Day, if you're a mother or you're the child of one. God bless.